Hello Rifties! Today I am gonna be sharing some of my tips and secret sauce on how to not only cook up your own decks, but how to also make them very competitive. I will be going through multiple different topics and I tried to go through them as fast as I could, so take notes and hopefully after this video you have become a nightmare to your local players and to your local metas. So where and how to start? First you have to think about what do you want to build your deck around. Some specific game plan like aggro or control, certain card synergy like hook with good units and targets, or 2-drop spells getting infinite value with any legend, maybe certain game mechanic like playing around with buffs or hidden cards, and in general have some kind of a vision of what you want from the deck. And are there some cards you want to play or have to play to achieve that goal with the deck? And then when you have your specific thing you want to build your deck around, where and how to start actually building the deck. You need to either start entirely from scratch or combine already existing decks and then modifying them yourself. So don't make it too complicated. For example, when I start building a deck, I go through different versions of the decks with said legend made by different people. So for example, when I want to make an Ezreal deck, I look at multiple different Ezreal decks and different versions of Ezreal, and then I combine the things I like and take away cards that I don't like. And that's the best and easiest way to start building your deck, in my opinion. So take inspiration from other players that have built similar decks or have tried to build a similar deck and then move forward from that. It's gonna save you a ton of time, and you may even see some cards in other players' decks that you didn't even think about yourself. Unfortunately, if your game plan, card combo or win condition is very niche and you haven't seen anyone use it before, or the set is very new, then you might be in a situation where you have to build your whole deck yourself. There just might be no one that has built a similar deck yet. For example, if you want to build a deck for some reason that only has 2-cost cards, maybe nobody has built a deck like that yet, so you have to build it from scratch. Then you need to start with some key staple cards for your game plan. Like if you want to make a Nocturne deck, you obviously put in 3 Nocturnes, 3 Teemo Strategists, 3 stack decks, maybe even 2 to 3 Cold Shots, because those cards make sense in a Nocturne deck. And after building the core of your deck, then you need to go and expand it by including some of the strongest cards in those colors. Like if your deck has those Cold Shots or other repeat cards, maybe add an Ezreal. Or if the meta is very wide and unit heavy, add a Watcher or a Bellows Breath. And after you have the core of the deck ready, then it's way easier to continue to add the rest of the cards to the deck, depending on the meta and what's just good on those colors and etc. Then we move to optimizing the deck, and the best way to improve your deck is to ask for feedback. Every time I build a deck, I always ask for feedback all the time. I go in the community Discord, Reddit, and ask for different opinions on my deck and maybe what to include in the specific meta, because meta always changes. So always keep slightly improving and changing your deck depending on the meta and depending on the opinions of other Riftbound players. They might suggest a card you never thought of before, and then you just simply have to play a ton of games. See what works, what doesn't. My set 1 Darius list came to be what it is by literally playing hundreds of games against different people, different legends, and in different local and tournament metas. So when I made my set 1 Darius deck, I made changes at least 2 to 5 times a week for months, for it slowly become very competitive and me finding success with it. So I slowly hammered the deck down and molded it to what it is now by changing cards all the time, sometimes multiple times per day. Saw what worked, what didn't, what felt awkward, and I would say after playing at least 50 games in that specific meta, you can finally start to be happy with the deck optimization. So building a deck can be a little grindy, but trust me, it is very, very worth it to optimize your deck for it to become as competitive as possible. And I'll get back to that later on the video, because we're gonna have to move to the science behind having 1 to 3 copies of a card. This is one of the, if not the most important part of the deck. Do you include 3 copies of a card, 2 copies of a card, or just 1 copy of a card? Because I have seen decks with way too many 3x copies of a card, and I get it's hard to cut cards out of your deck sometimes, but cutting cards to only 2 to 1 copies will strengthen your deck and make it way more consistent. 3 copies should only be reserved to cards you have to see and you want to see in each game you play. And you don't mind drawing 2 or even 3 copies of said card in that game, or the card is so strong that you can take the risk of drawing 3 copies of that card and it can lose you the game, but it's so strong that the reward for drawing that card more consistently in each game, even as a one-off, is so high that the risk of drawing 3 of them is worth it. And easy examples, Kai'Sa decks put 3 falling stars in their deck because of how well it works with their legend. A hook deck puts 3 hooks in their deck because their deck is just so much stronger with a hook on board. But once again, this comes with a risk, because when you draw 3 hooks, you're in trouble. But hook is so important that you have to take the risk of possibly drawing 3 of them for the reward of drawing even 1 hook more consistently. A weapon deck puts 3 BF swords in their deck because it's the strongest weapon, and you don't want to draw 3 BF swords, but you have to take the risk so you can draw at least 1 sword in each game more consistently. Some cards might seem like a 3-off card, but actually aren't. So let me show you some examples of a 2x card. First example is Noxus Hopeful. It is a good and very strong unit, but if you put 3 Noxus Hopefuls in your deck and you draw 2 or even 3 hopefuls in your opening hand, you suddenly have a big problem, because if you can't enable the Noxus Hopeful's Legion effect early on, they become a brick and will most likely slow down your early game, and you would just wish the other hopeful was anything else, because if the other hopeful was something else, then it would be easier to proc the other hopeful's Legion effect. So hopeful is a card I would like to see as a one-off in my early game. Drawing 2 isn't bad usually, but drawing 2 hopefuls can be bad, and drawing 3 hopefuls would be disastrous in some decks. So hopeful is a very good example of usually a 2-off card in most decks. Then Punch First is another good example. We just saw a Fiora lose in the finals because they got bricked by having 3 Punch Firsts in their hand. And it's a very, very strong card, but drawing multiple Punch Firsts early on will always lead to the second or third Punch First being a little awkward. You might not draw enough orange runes to even recycle them for all of those Punch Firsts. You might not draw enough units, so if your unit gets killed, a Punch First in hand won't do anything if you don't have any units left. And in the regional finals, the Fiora just insta-lost to Brynn here because Punch First is an action, so even though the Fiora was defending and sitting on 2 Punch Firsts, they couldn't play them because the opponent had played Brynn here, and the Punch Firsts just were basically air. They didn't do anything in that game. They sat in the hand of Fiora from turn 1 to the end of the game without them using either of them. So it never feels bad to draw 1 Punch First. It can sometimes be good to draw 2 Punch Firsts, and it can sometimes be awkward to draw 2 of them, but drawing 3 of them will almost always feel very bad and very awkward, especially if your opponent is good at the game and they play around your Punch Firsts. Then having 3 in your deck will hurt you way more than help you, if that makes sense. And in general, the card itself can look good, but in practice, you just don't want to draw 3 of them ever. So what can look so strong on paper and it can just seem like an insta 3x copies in your deck can very easily be a 2-off card or even a 1-off card. And that's what you always have to keep in mind. So don't auto 3x include cards because they look good or strong. At the end of the day, how important is that card? How much does your game plan rely on that card? For example, obviously you have to auto include 3 hooks in a hook deck. How much does your game plan rely on that card? And are you willing to risk the possibility of drawing 3 copies of the card? Or should you only include 2 copies, maybe find the card less often, but at least you won't brick your hand with multiple copies of that card so consistently. Then, when to include only 1 copy of a card, you should only put 1 copy of a card when it's a very good card as a standalone, but it will feel weak and possibly brick your hand if you draw 2 of them. For example, because Darius has very limited draw, I decided to only run 1 cleave. Drawing a single cleave feels very good, and a single cleave can catch your enemy off guard, but drawing 2 cleaves always felt bad. And with the limited draw of the deck, I would have always rather had anything else than the second cleave. Because as Darius, you would always rather have a unit or a hidden blade or literally anything else than the second cleave. And the cleave isn't necessary to win, but it's good. So you have to be very careful of how many copies of a card you have, especially if your colors lack some draw. Shen is another good example. Shen is a surprise card, and your opponents may not play around Shen, but drawing 2 Shens is very weird and awkward. So Shen is an obvious 1x card in your main deck. You could put a second Shen in your side deck, but in your main deck I would usually run only 1 Shen. And then Blade of the Ruined King can have some explosivity and it can cook, but imagine having 2 Blade of the Ruined Kings on your board. You would never even have enough units to equip both of them. So Blade of the Ruined King is most likely an auto 1x include in almost all decks. And I was asked multiple times why my Darius list had so many one-offs. And it's because the one-off card feels good when you draw it. It's strong. Obviously, you don't mind drawing it as a one-off. But I don't want to risk drawing 2 of them by having 2 of them in my deck. So the card is strong, but it's only strong as a one-off, and drawing the card also isn't necessary for my win or the game plan. It's just a kind of positive occurrence. You know, it happens, you draw it, you feel good, and you feel even better because you can't draw another one of them. So one-offs usually also catch your opponent very off guard, because why would they ever play around a one-off card? And your one-off cards can be very weird, surprise cards. So sometimes your opponent may never even expect that you're playing a card like that in your deck in general. So one-off cards are very strong. They can cheese you some wins, but the risk of having 2 of them is too high. Then what to keep in mind when building your own deck? Firstly, you have to be humble. You have to be open to making changes to the deck every time you play it. For example, when I made my set 1 Darius, I made changes so often that the deck was updated multiple times a week, and that's how it slowly became pretty competitive and I started finding success with it in tournaments. And it takes time. It takes tons of games, and it just takes a lot of patience to build a deck that works competitively. So you have to be patient, you have to take on feedback, and you have to play against every matchup you can. And at the end of the day, it's a win-win anyways. Because while you're honing the deck, you learn all the matchups, you learn every niche tactic with your deck, and at the same time your deck slowly almost optimizes itself because you see what works and what doesn't. And while you're honing your deck, you yourself also improve with the deck. So you're improving the deck, you're improving your gameplay with the deck, and it's just a win-win situation. Even when I was winning multiple tournaments with Darius, some still commented that they don't understand how the deck works, or they just can't win consistently with it. So while I optimized the deck, I also optimized my piloting of the deck. I didn't need to draw baited hook anymore to win. I didn't need to, get some insane RNG to win. I kinda knew the deck like my own pockets, and I started to win games with the most awkward hands and most awkward draws as possible. So, practice makes perfect, And then, as the last topic of the video, how to utilize your sideboard to its maximum value. I have a little rule for myself right now. I have 3 to 5 spaces in the side deck for my own game plan, for my own battlefields, or for when I'm going second or first in the game. So I have a set amount of cards for myself, and then I have 3 to 5 slots, for example, a hard matchup, or for some cards that counter the most popular meta decks at that time. And these are just cards that are good against the enemy's game plan. So I like to both enhance my own game plan and strategies with the side deck, and at the same time try to counter as many decks as possible. And I have posted a more in-depth side decking guide before, which still holds true, so I recommend you check it out. I explain my sideboarding very in-depth in that video. And when your deck finally feels done, you still have to keep changing up the side deck occasionally to catch your enemies off guard. For example, I put a Sky Splitter in my sideboard when I went to play in a cash tournament, and I had a Hextech Ray against Annie's. For example, this Sky Splitter ended up winning me a cash tournament here in Finland. Our local meta was very Yi and Teemo heavy, so the Sky Splitter caught them very off guard because Sky Splitter can't be defied, for example. So it was a very good surprise card for Yis especially. And in general, having a couple of surprise cards that your enemies will never play around or expect will end up cheesing you a win or two. And it just might be the difference between, becoming the first place in a tournament or becoming the second place in a tournament. So some surprise cards will always end up being very strong. And now you're a professional deck builder. So go combine some of your favorite strategies and include some of your own twists and cards in them. Ask for feedback, keep honing your deck until you know all the matchups and you know your own deck like your own pockets. And let me know how it goes. Did you find success with your own deck? Or did you just end up net decking the strongest Draven deck and taking that to your local skirmishes? But thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and hopefully I'm gonna see you in the next video, or you could even hop in and chat in one of my future streams. Yeah, I have started streaming also, so be sure to check it out.